Next, let's talk about derived variables. A derived variable is a new variable, a new data point that's derived or created from the data that you have. So it's the same general idea as recoding data, but there's a subtle difference here. When we're recoding data, we're basically taking existing data and making it into a more useful form. So for example, we took that income data and just expressed it as ranges of income instead. Or we took people's self-entered cities and just standardized how that was represented. We're not really creating new data there. We're just massaging the data we have to be more useful, right? With derived variables, however, we're creating an entirely new data point based on the data that we have. Maybe it's some sort of calculation based on other columns in the data. For example, you might need to compute the difference between two fields. That might be a useful thing to look at in a report. Maybe you're looking at how long it took for an item to ship or how long it took a user to go from first looking at an item to actually purchasing it. You might have a derived variable in that example where the amount of time elapsed is something you compute and put into a new data point. So let's look at an example here. In this very simple case, I'm going back to my example of running a online course website. And what I'm interested in is reporting on the average number of lessons a person views per day. So in this example, I'm keeping track of each student, the day they started the course, the day they ended the course, and how many lessons they viewed during that time. Maybe some people don't actually watch all the lessons before they quit the course, right? So in this case, Mr. Jack Sparrow started on July 1st and ended on July 28th, and during that time, he viewed 51 lessons. So I have this expression here for this new derived value called average lessons per day. This new derived variable is just taking the difference between the start date and end date, expressed in days, and using that as a denominator on a division by the number of lessons they consumed. So all that's doing is taking the lessons viewed divided by the end date minus the start date effectively for each student. So in Google Sheets, you compute the difference between dates using the dateDiff command there, and that D in quotation marks means that I want to express that difference in days. Again, every tool will have its own way of doing this. So, the implementation details here for Google Sheets is unimportant for the exam. It's just the concept here of a derived variable that you need to understand. So a derived variable is a new column, a new data point that you're adding onto each record that's derived from the other data points for that record. And you can see we just copied that down and computed the same statistic for Jean-Luc Picard and Han Solo. And you can see in this example, Jean-Luc Picard is our busiest student, consuming over 15 lessons per day on average. So simple example there of a derived variable. One finer point here is the question of, do I actually store those derived variables or just the formula? In a lot of packages, including this example here, all we're doing is storing the formula here. We're not actually storing the actual derived variable. And that's because it's more space efficient to store a single formula as opposed to all of those numerical values that can just be recomputed as needed. It kind of depends on what you're doing though. If you do need to optimize for speed, it might be faster to actually store those derived variables than to recompute them every time. But if you're optimizing for space, then it makes more sense to store the formula for how you derive those variables rather than the derived variables themselves. That's derived variables in a nutshell. Pretty simple concept. All it means is that we're taking other fields and creating a new field from those fields based on some function applied to them.